Hi, everyone. Welcome back. Surfing Baseball with Ed Lynch. Here's former Major League player for the Mets and Cubs and former general manager of the Cubs, Ed Lynch. And Ed, starting off, what are your there's a lot of issues going on in the game right now going into 2025. What are your thoughts? And just want to hear kind of what you think is going on.
Well, first of all, Tyler, it's nice to be on with you. There are so many issues right now in Major League Baseball. They're facing some pretty important issues other than most off seasons. But the one issue that's been around forever, it seems like, is the disparity in revenues between the highest and the lowest. And disparity, I mean the unequalness, the ability of some teams to do things that others can't financially. For instance, the New York Yankees and the New York Mets, their revenues are so high compared to other teams. And also you have the Dodgers, the Cubs, Boston, Atlanta. But at the other end of the spectrum, you've got teams who their revenues, like take Kansas City, they have $302 million in revenues, total dollars earned. And that number is less than what the Mets, the Yankees payroll is. Wow. So the Mets and the Yankees are spending more money on players than the Kansas City Royals are making. So how are the Kansas City Royals supposed to compete against teams like the Yankees, the Dodgers, the Cubs, the Mets? And I say that, interleague, because obviously when you get to the postseason, you're competing against teams in your own league. But during the regular season, everybody plays everybody now. So, if you're the Kansas City Royals, you have to worry about the Mets and Dodgers as much as you have to worry about the Yankees and the Red Sox. So that regular season disparity is pretty high, and that's a problem. That is a serious problem for Major League Baseball. And it's one that I think needs to be addressed. Again, the payrolls. You got the New York Mets payroll at $306 million, and Kansas City's total revenues are $302 million. So when the Yankees and the Mets are over 300 in payroll, and you have teams like Miami, Baltimore, Cleveland under 100 million, it's virtually impossible to compete against these teams. So that's the 900-pound gorilla that's sitting in the corner that nobody really talks about. We talk a lot about these ancillary issues, which are important, but until there's a system where teams feel like, if you're a Pittsburgh Pirate fan and you wake up on opening day and you say, you know what, every year we have a legitimate chance to win the National League Central, and we have a legitimate chance to go to the World Series because our front office and our manager are as good as the Dodgers, the Braves, the Yankees, the Mets. So we have a chance to win. I don't think that possibility has got much weight to it anymore. I mean, if you're a Pirate fan, how are you going to compete? And that's a problem. Bud Selig, who I think was one of the great commissioners we had, hope. Hope is the one thing that every fan has, and a belief that their team has a chance to win. I don't know if that's possible under this current system. Now, how is that cured? Well, it's the big C word, which is a big problem for the union, and nobody ever wants to see it. It's a cap. It's a cap on players' salaries, and a hard cap. Now, there's luxury taxes and things like that are in place, but I don't think Steve Cohen's going to stop spending money because of a luxury tax. And under the system that's in place now, he's I was a Met, and I'm happy to see him as a Met owner because he's going to spend what it takes to win. And as a fan, that's what you want to see. But is that the best system in place to help all your partners? I don't know. So I think some sort of cap is something that needs to be talked about. I mean, you bring up the cap word, and I was a union rep, and the cap was a dirty word. And until something is in place to help some of these teams with less revenues and less payroll to compete on a yearly basis with these other teams, we're going to continue to see the same teams in the postseason and the World Series. you look at some of the other leagues. Baseball's the only major league in the United States without a cap. The NHL, for instance, the NHL has a hard salary cap. And according to some published reports, every team in the NHL made money last year. Did every team in the major leagues make money? I don't think so. I mean, it's hard to tell because their books are private because they're privately held. The only one that's publicly held is the Atlanta Braves, so those numbers are going to be pretty accurate. So in the NHL, for instance, the Detroit Tigers were valued less than the Detroit Red Wings as a franchise, and that's pretty sad, and it's pretty alarming. Not because hockey is not a great sport. I love hockey, but they're playing half the number of games in a stadium that's half the size of a baseball team. So when an NHL team is valued higher than a team like in Major League Baseball, like the Tigers, they're playing in the same town with half as many games in an arena that holds half as many people. That's a problem. And the Canadian teams, their revenues are in Canadian dollars, and they're paying out in U.S. dollars. So any kind of fluctuation in the dollar, in the rate of exchange on that Canadian dollar, if it's worth less than a U.S. dollar, which I believe it is right now. If you're a Canadian team, if you're the Toronto Maple Leafs, the Canadians, and the Oilers, you're bringing in 90 cents and paying out $1. So, I mean, that's a problem, but they've overcome that because their system allows teams to compete because of that salary cap. So, I mean, I see that as the major issue going forward over the years in Major League Baseball.
And I'm curious, too, you brought up Steve Cohen, who, being a Mets fan myself is, I think he's a great owner. Do you think he's going to shell out the money to get Juan Soto? Do you think Soto's going back to the Yankees? What's your prediction on Juan Soto?
Well, I mean, I think it's going to come to some sort of, conclusion here shortly, maybe even before the winter meetings start at the end of the week. I don't know. I mean, obviously, there's only going to be a handful of teams, if that are even in this discussion. It's funny when I see other teams have met with Boris about Soto. They got no chance of signing him. They have no interest in signing him. That's an old ploy to let your fans know, hey, we tried. And again, it goes back to that's the problem. If the Pittsburgh Pirates say, hey, we're going to meet with Scott Boras about Juan Soto, I mean, people would laugh and that's sad. That is sad. The Pirates, one of the great organizations in baseball, have very smart people, running that operation who've done great things. Look at what Paul Skeens has done for Major League Baseball. They have absolutely no chance of signing a guy like Juan Soto. So when you hear certain teams said, hey, we've looked at it, they're just trying to set out a signal to their fans that they're trying. So it's going to be, the Yankees, the Mets, the Dodgers. If it's somebody else, it would surprise me. Toronto's has got as much money as anybody. But it's going to be one of those top teams in revenue. It's going to be one of those teams that are in a major market with major local television revenue that can go out and pay a player like this and not worry about going over a cap. So it's going to be interesting to see if there's a Ohtani type contract there. I guarantee you, Boris, I think he probably felt left out, when Ohtani signed this contract. That is the most brilliant contract been signed in Major League Baseball in 100 years, in my opinion. They're paying this guy, $7 million a year instead of 70. I believe those I think that's the number. I'm not sure. But anyway, they're paying him and diverting so much of his salary into the future that the cost right now is so low to them. But here's the problem for me. They've announced that, they did this contract with Ohtani because when he's put aside most of the contract, and when that bigger chunk of money starts getting paid out, he's no longer going to be living in California. Therefore, he won't have to pay state taxes. Now, he's going to avoid probably paying about $100 million in state taxes. I would have to believe the state of California is going to have something to say about that. I think all these teams in these major markets, if they start signing players to those contracts, the legislature is going to get involved, and they're going to pass a law that says that you earned the money at this time while you were living in the state. You are going to pay taxes on that money. And I think there's a bill being introduced in California already as we speak, and New York, I believe, to get around that and make sure that players pay their fair share of their taxes while they're earning that money in that jurisdiction. So you might see a contract, with the Yankees or the Mets that's along these lines. You got some brilliant financial people involved. Walters with Guggenheim, the Dodgers. You got Steve Cohen. You got the Yankees, who I'm sure have access to brilliant people. Scott Boras is a very smart agent. So it wouldn't surprise me if there's some sort of contract similar to Ohtani's on this thing. But again, Tyler, it's going to be one of the big 3 or 4 or 5 teams. The 25 at the other end of the spectrum have no chance to sign him. So that's my thoughts on that.
So I guess last question on this is, are we going to see a lot more Bobby Bonilla days moving forward, or a lot less?
Well, yeah, I think you are going to see a lot of Bobby Bonilla type contracts in terms of deferred money. But I think a lot of them are going to be for that very purpose, to be able to pay a player $700 million and have them only taxed on, 10% of that money rather than 100%. But again, I think you're going to see it's no longer the Bobby Bonilla contract. It's the Shohei Ohtani contract, where, again, in my opinion, by the end of this contract, the Dodgers are going to make money by signing Ohtani to this contract. They set aside a lump sum, which equals the future value of that money when they have to pay him. But there's a lot of revenues they're generating by having him in Japan and other things that are not subject to sharing with the other teams. Now, if you buy a Los Angeles Dodger hat for $30, $1, this is a gross simplification, but teams are going to share in that licensing revenue. So it might be $1 goes to every team. But there are other things that are not subject to that. Now, I'm not an expert, but I think if the Dodgers broadcast a game in Japan, the revenues from that, is that subject to the Major League Baseball sharing? The Yankees don't share their local revenue broadcasting with the Pirates or the White Sox or the Rays. So there's a lot of ways they can generate income off that contract or off that player and not have to share with anybody. Is the advertising on behind home plate in Japanese virtual advertising that you see if you're watching a game in Tokyo that you don't see if you're watching a game in the U.S.? Is that money subject to sharing with the other teams? I don't know, but I don't think so. So these kinds of contracts, it's brilliant. Someone's going to step up, and I don't think it's going to be it might be the clubs. The union, I don't think will interfere with that kind of contract because the numbers are so huge. I mean, paying Ohtani $700 million. I mean, I don't think the union is going to get in the middle of that and say, no, you can't do that anymore because it's so good for the player, especially under the current tax system, if it's true. So I think the clubs, though, are going to have something to say about it in the next basic agreement. And again, it's more for the haves and less for the have-nots.
For sure. And one thing I want to ask you about, you and I have talked a lot about this, is Tampa Bay. There's a situation there where it was devastating what happened in Florida. So what are kind of your thoughts on Tampa Bay situation? Obviously the dome's got to go. It's terrible. I worked there. It's awful, but there's no future there. There was talk about building a new stadium, and now, because of the hurricane and all this political stuff, what's your thoughts on Tampa Bay and where they're at?
Well, I'll tell you what, they're at a crossroads right now. I think virtually as we speak, the Pinellas County board and the team are right at a very important time right now. I think Pinellas County wrote them a letter, wrote the Rays a letter, an ultimatum last week saying, are you in or are you out? And the Rays responded in a letter Monday saying, hey, we plan on building a $1.3 billion ballpark. So we're in. That our plan is still in effect. But having trained there for so many years in St. Petersburg, when I was with the Mets back in the 80s, I used to drive by that site every day on, I think it's First Avenue South, where the ballpark is now. It was just a very downtrodden area back then. But there are issues, as you know, Tyler.
Still horrible.
Yeah, people, who wants to go across that bridge? You know, if you're over in Tampa and you want to go to a night game, Wednesday night game in April, you come across that bridge with your kids, you get home at 11 o'clock at night or 12 o'clock at night. And it's a terrible spot. I was hoping that Ybor City or somewhere on the other side of the bridge, maybe near the airport, and ironically, they're going to be playing in a great location, though, at Steinbrenner Field, which is right by the airport. It's perfect. Yeah. There's huge population around there. There's good ingress, egress, but it only holds 12,000. And it's a very dated stadium. It's one of those stadiums where if you're in line to get a hot dog, you can't see the game because you have to walk outside the stadium onto the outer concourse to go to the concession stands. And that was the 1990s, late 80s, early 90s design. It's the way Port St. Lucie is also, you know, I mean, so ironically, they're in the right spot in the wrong ballpark, but it's going to be tough. I mean, they're talking about probably at least 3 years in that ballpark. And it was funny. I was talking to somebody at a high up level at MLB. They said, well, what if they get to the World Series? What are you going to do then? You're going to play a World Series game at Steinbrenner Field? Obviously, they'll move it like they did in COVID. They'll go somewhere neutral and play that. But the issues are overwhelming. And then again, you've got the Oakland A's on the other side. You know, they're going to Vegas. They're going to Vegas. I haven't seen anything recently that convinces me that they're absolutely going to Las Vegas. I don't think they've dotted the T's and dotted the last I's on that thing. So they're going to be playing in Sacramento until the 2028 season. So again, you've got 25, 6, and 7, 3 years in a minor league ballpark. And so the issues are many for those two teams. And this is the last thing Major League Baseball needs right now, is certainly the damage done to the Tampa Bay Rays. I mean, they expected the A's thing, but the Rays now was just another piling on another issue that's very trying for Major League Baseball. And I don't envy the commissioner what he's going through.
Yeah, for sure. And Ed, two more topics I want to cover. First, and this is just me personally because I live in Nashville. Do you think Nashville's going to get a team out of this deal, or is there anything with Nashville, or do you think that's just all kind of media hearsay, or what are your thoughts on Nashville?
I think if there is expansion, I do think Nashville is one of the front runners. I think Salt Lake City's the other front runner. I really do. I think they've got the planning, they've got the land, they got the money. I think Nashville's a dynamic area. They're going to be encroaching on, you know, you're more familiar with Nashville than I am, but you know, they're going to be encroaching on some territories there. There's going to have to be some deals done there. But I think those two are the two front runners. But, you know, they're looking to expand when they have existing teams that are really in trouble. As I said, the A's and the Rays. So, you know, before you start, you know, talking about expansion, you've got to cure the problems of your current partnership. So it's going to be interesting. And again, this is not a problem that was created by the commissioner. I think he's done a good job. I think these are things that are, if you're trying to grow, painful. Growing can be painful. You know, you're dealing with legislatures, different jurisdictions, taxes, all kinds of issues. So it'll be interesting to see how it goes forward. But I think the focus of Major League Baseball right now is probably on the Rays and trying to figure out where they're going. And, you know, I think the A's are further along in their process with Vegas than certainly the Rays are with Pinellas County.
So there's a lot of concern about quote unquote offense in baseball. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, you know, I think the offense of philosophy they're teaching now, there's been an overwhelming success. They ought to pat themselves on the back because they've done a great job. If you're teaching players to maximize their bat speed at an uppercut angle, launch angle, and try to hit home runs and don't worry about strikeouts and don't worry about batting average, they've been an overwhelming success. The problem is that not a lot happens in between home runs. I mean, when you have sky-high strikeouts and, you know, the walks are up because of the lack of command on pitchers, but you have to give them where credit is due. You know, there were only 7 300 hitters in Major League Baseball in 2024, and I'm going back to 1990 as a benchmark, pre-steroid of the 90s. I mean, in 1990 there were 22 300 hitters in Major League Baseball versus 7 now, with less teams, 4 less teams. And in Major League Baseball this year, there were 23 guys hit 30 home runs. And in 1990, there were 12. In 2024, 90 players hit 20 or more home runs. And in 1990, there were 42. So 90 guys hit 20 home runs in 2024 and 42 in 1990. But this is a stat that really blew me away. 46 players in Major League Baseball have struck out 150 times or more in 2024, and there were 6 in 1990s. So home runs are way up. Strikeouts are way up. Pitchers' walks are up. Strikeouts are way up for pitchers. So they've accomplished everything they're trying to accomplish. It's not the result that's the problem. It's what they're teaching, the reward system. You know, they're rewarding players for hitting 20 home runs and not caring if they strike out 150 times. So I think the reward system has to change. But that's going to be a tough thing to do, because I think one of the biggest problems in our game now, I call the 3 Bs: the balls, the bats, and the ballparks. You know, the balls are, let's face it, the ball is very lively now. I've talked to some pitchers privately, and they call it, you know, the Pro V1, which is the most popular golf ball on the PGA Tour. That's what they call the baseball now, sarcastically. You know, the balls are lively. There's no denying it. You just have to look at where some of these balls are flying. The bats are a major issue. You know, back in the 90s or back in the 80s and 90s, when I was involved heavily in on-field operations with teams, or as a player or as a front office guy, you know, that ash bat, which is a very soft wood, I remember guys hitting balls on the screws, and I'd look at that bat when they came back in the dugout, and you could see the indentation of the seams of the baseball on the bat. That's how soft it was. No matter what you did with that bat, put it in a kiln or whatever you did, bone that bat, it was going to have moisture in the core, and it was going to be a softer wood. Now the bat's Canadian maple. I guess they said there was some sort of virus or whatever the word is that destroyed the ash population or crop, ash wood. So the bats now are Canadian maple. And these bats, let me tell you something, Tyler, these bats are hard as a rock. They're like aluminum bats. You could drive nails with that thing and it won't have an indentation on it. And then the third thing is the ballparks. Let's face it, every ballpark is smaller than the one it replaces. They're taking away a lot of the foul territory in these ballparks. And for people that haven't figured it out, more foul territory means more pop-ups that stay in play that are outs. Though that's a huge factor. You know, when you've got bases loaded, 2 outs, and a guy pops one up behind home plate and the catcher runs back, like at the old Dodgers Stadium, he runs back, 50 feet and catches the ball with room to spare, and you're out of the inning. Now he goes back 15 feet and he's up against the screen. So a lot of balls are going in the stands that used to be in play. You know, the only stadium that was like the old days was Oakland, and they're out of there now. So, and the fences are shorter. And so, I understand why they're doing it, but there's going to be a result in that. So it's going to be a lot easier to hit home runs with the 3 Bs the way they are now. If you deaden the ball and you make the bat softer, you can't do anything about the ballparks. You're going to see a lot less home runs. So what are players going to do? The Aaron Judges of the world are always going to have that uppercut. The Stantons of the world, Ohtani, those guys are always going to have that uppercut to hit home runs. That's fine. But when you have an 8-hole hitter who hits 20 home runs, hits 237, and strikes out 175 times and goes to arbitration and beats you, that's a problem for the clubs. So this is the way the system is now is not a very good thing for the clubs in terms of compensation. So if it gets to a point where, I remember Ted Simmons told me this. Ted Simmons said when he came up to the big leagues and when he was a star player in St. Louis, in old Busch Stadium, you didn't even try to hit the ball between the gaps. You were not going to hit a home run between the gaps at old Busch Stadium. If you're lucky to get a pitch, maybe a soft pitch in or something down and in that you can pull, that's when you try to maybe lift the ball out of the park. But to try to hit a ball over the pitcher's head, in old Busch Stadium, there was a saying when I was pitching in Busch Stadium in St. Louis, that the old one, if the ball's hit directly over your head, if it doesn't have a blue flame coming out of the back of it, Mookie's going to catch it. That was our saying in New York. I mean, nobody went dead central at the old Busch Stadium, a lot of these ballparks, Nobody wanted to pitch at Wrigley Field. Now it's probably in the middle of the pack, in terms of the ease of hitting home runs. So if you make it tough to hit home runs, these guys at the bottom of your order, at the top of the order, they're not going to be, mishitting balls to right field and flipping their bat at Yankee Stadium, and the ball goes 285 feet and it's a home run. It's just not going to happen. So that will change the approach. George Brett said something to me. I was talking to George a while ago, and he said he had a level swing on every pitch. No matter where it was, he tried to have a level swing. If you look at that pitch he hit, even on the Pine Tar pitch, it was about up here, but he had a level swing through the ball. And he said, if it hits the top of my bat, it goes up. If it hits the center of my bat, it's a straight line drive. Hits the bottom of my bat, it's a hard ground ball. That was his launch angle. He didn't change the launch angle on his bat. He had a good level swing through the strike zone. Get your bat into the hitting area and keep it in that hitting area as long as you can keep it there, and let that guy on the mound who's overthrowing, let him provide the power. I think the worst thing a hitter can do is the harder he's throwing, the harder you swing. It's amazing if you have a nice, easy swing, keep the bat in the strike zone, and how many times are hitters are in hitting situations, 2-0, 3-1. You're going to get a fastball. I think you can say with certainty now, more than ever before in the history of baseball, I know what's coming, because everybody's 3-1 and 2-0, 3-1. You think some of these relievers are going to come in max effort and it's 2-0, 3-1. You think they're going to throw a breaking ball? No, they're not going to throw a breaking ball. They're going to throw as hard as they can. So if you just get your bat into the zone, keep it level, you're going to make solid contact, and you're going to drive the ball. There's going to be more balls in play. There's going to be more action. And I'll tell you what, more balls in play means you better concentrate on your defense. That's why there's such a lax in defense. And I hear people say now defenses are better than ever been. That is totally untrue. The official scorers now are so lenient. Everything is a hit. I'm a pitcher, so I'm going to be saying this, but I think it's true. They're a lot more lenient now on balls in play that aren't fielded. Everything's a hit. So you're fooling yourself if you think teams are better defensively now than they were 25, 30 years ago. They're not. And in the outfield, the ability of outfielders to throw is embarrassing. Outfielders don't throw well. They don't throw accurately because no one takes infield, because the defense is not that important. That's why they use stats to measure defense. There isn't a single stat that you can show me that can accurately measure the defensive prowess of a position player. And I say that with all conviction. And I was on the field for 12 years. I was a GM for 6 years. I was a minor league director. I've watched thousands of games. I scouted for 16 years. And I can tell you there is no stat that they can come up with that tells me how good a guy is as a defender. Fielding,
and then not
fielding possession, no fielding percentage, no. And anything else they come up with, they can't do it. So I think more balls in play, there's going to be more emphasis on defense. It's going to be more of an old style style of play that everybody seems to be wanting now, where stolen bases mean something, where moving runners along, it means something. There are such things as productive outs. When somebody said there's no such thing as a productive out, that's somebody that's never been on a baseball field in their life.
And Ed, not to put you on the spot here, but I'm curious now that we're going back and forth with offense, defense, and all that in baseball. Ohtani, obviously hitter, pitcher. What would your GM of Los Angeles, is Ohtani pitching next year?
Well, yeah, for me, no, I wouldn't put him on the mound. We'll put aside who makes that decision. But for me, no. He's already had 2 Tommy Johns. This guy's one of the most valuable offensive players. Now, who do you compare him to? You say to people, well, who do you compare Ohtani to? What does everybody say? Babe Ruth, right?
Babe Ruth.
One of the better pitchers in baseball, became one of the greatest offensive players. And I'll say, well, the Yankees made him a full-time position player. How did that work out for them? Pretty good? What do you think? If he goes back on that mound and he has another injury to his elbow, he's looking at his 3rd Tommy John. Not only is that going to affect his pitching, but it's going to affect, when he does get healthy after another year off, it's going to affect his swing. There's no way you can have 3 major reconstructive surgeries on your elbow as a hitter without affecting your swing somehow. Either the path of your bat speed, the way you can extend your arms. Hitters hit with their arms, they hit with their entire body, but their arms are a major part of their hitting. Excuse me. And a bad elbow, you're not going to be swinging the bat with a torn ligament in your elbow. You're going to have to go through the Tommy John again. That's just my opinion. He's a once-in-a-generational or more player, a great player, a great asset for our game. I love him to death. You can't help but love this guy when you watch him play and the reaction everybody around him. And I think putting him on the mound and risking a 3rd Tommy John would be a crime for me. But again, who's going to decide? Shohei Ohtani is going to decide. If he says, I'm pitching, excuse me, if he comes in spring training and says, I'm pitching, they're not going to be able to stop him. Now, you could have somebody talk to him, his agent, the doctors. I think the doctors would be the most important people in this process and say to him the things that I just said. I'd hate to lose this guy as a hitter because we put him on the mound and he had a 3rd Tommy John.
And last question, Ed, talking about home runs and all that. Obviously, you were GM during the home run chase, Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire. I have to ask, do you ever think there will be a home run chase like Sammy Sosa, Mark McGwire?
To match that, the impact of that, I don't think there'll be anything of that. And it was like a perfect storm. We're coming off a strike. Attendance was down. The fans were not very happy with us. They were not happy with the union. They weren't happy with the clubs. That guy that's working his ass off to, make $40,000 to feed his family. And, once a year he comes out to see a game with his kids. And now he sees players walking away from the money they're making, owners shutting down with the money they're making. So what Sammy and Mark McGwire did in 1998 was incredible. It was a seminal moment for baseball. They could have gone north or south. And these 2 guys grabbed baseball by the collar and just dragged them into the next level of interest. So do I think there'll be another race like that? Yeah, I do. I do think there'll be guys. I think this Roger Maris 60 home runs thing is, I think you're going to see guys routinely hitting, not routinely, but you're going to see player hitting 50 home runs every year, at least 1 or 2. And if those guys get in a position where now things go together and now they're 60 home runs and now they're in the mid-60s and they're battling each other and they get into the 70s and now they're looking at Barry Bonds' record of 73, then you'll see the same kind of interest that we had back in 98. Excuse me, but the chances of that for 2 players to get up to 73 home runs would be pretty phenomenal and pretty rare, but it'd be interesting to see. So is it possible? Absolutely. Is it likely? No, but it is possible.
And I'll leave you with this. So the story that always kind of brings a smile to my face, not a smile, but a smirk to my face, is when you told me that during the home run chase, I can't remember what game it was, but Sosa, McGuire, they were chasing each other, and Sharon Panazzo, good friend of ours, was there at all the media, and she did a great job. And then the Cubs made the playoffs, and there was like nobody there. And it's like, Cubs never make the playoffs, and it's like you guys got a break during the playoffs, but that's how much of an impact the
every day we had. It seemed like hundreds of writers there every day through the entire process. The last 2 months of the season, every day we had to have barricades behind the batting cage, and there'd be 150 people there every day. And then Sammy had to do like a pre and post game in a big room. And then I remember we won that wild card game, and now the regular season is over, and we go into Atlanta, and I'm standing behind the batting cage during batting practice, and there's Sharon. And it's like maybe 25, 30 writers there, like at a normal postseason game. And I went to Sharon and said, "Boy, it's like a deserted island around here right now. There's nobody here." And it was a postseason game with the normal amount of postseason writer coverage. So that was pretty funny. My hat's off to Sammy Sosa, the way he handled it. Yeah. He handled it like a champ. He loved it. Mark McGuire didn't like it so much, but he did a good job. But Sammy loved it, and he carried that whole thing on his back. And for a time there, he was the most famous athlete in the world. I don't care what anybody says. Pick out an F1 driver, Formula driver, or a soccer player. Those guys obviously every year are right there. But for that period of time, in that 2 or 3 month period, July, August, September of 1998, Sammy Sosa was the biggest athlete in the world, and I'm glad I had a chance to witness it.
Ed, I appreciate you putting that team together and all that, and glad we got to do this. Thank you so much. All your insights are invaluable. I know the baseball community loves it and appreciate everything. So Ed Lynch, Surfing Baseball. Follow us, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, YouTube. Subscribe to us on YouTube, Vimeo. We're on all the social medias. So Surfing Baseball with Ed Lynch.